Welcome to the Beyond Barriers podcast. If you're an ambitious woman who wants to advance in leadership, then this podcast is for you. This podcast is co-hosted by Nikki Barua, digital innovator, serial entrepreneur, author, and speaker, and Monica Marquez, senior corporate leader, ex-Googler, and diversity expert. From inspiring stories to cutting-edge strategies, you'll learn how to develop the skill set, mindset, and tool set to get future-ready fast and accelerate your success.
Hi, this is Nikki Barua, your host for this episode. Life is not about being perfect. You're going to make mistakes, especially if you take risks. Our guest today is Ingrid Kiefer, who shares insights into her career success. She believes in taking risks early in your career where the potential failures will not be as impactful as further down the line. Ingrid has created her own opportunities and found success in being authentic and accountable. She shares numerous stories of how taking ownership creates the right outcomes for the business and also for your career. Grounded by her family, Ingrid tells us how important our personal lives are to success at work. She talks about how there is power in saying no, not only for your own boundaries, but for the person who needs to know if they can really count on you. Join us as we learn from Ingrid how to take risks, fail forward, and be ourselves at work. Visit IamBeyondBarriers.com, where you'll find show notes and links to all the resources in this episode, including the best way to get in touch with Ingrid.
Hi, Ingrid. Welcome to the Beyond Barriers podcast. We're so thrilled to have you here today.
Thanks, Nikki. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right in because I'm so eager to share your story with our audience. So let's start with just overview of kind of what your formation story is.
Sure. So it's interesting. I never thought I was going to get into finance, to be honest. I graduated from school. I went to Europe for a bit. I came back and my parents were both in academics, liberal arts backgrounds, classicists. My father's a marine biologist. My thought had been to actually go into being an English professor. Loved English, loved writing. And then I realized that I needed to make some money. So I saw, and this is what got me into finance, that I had a degree from a good university that would allow me to get into a finance field, despite the fact that I had a liberal arts background. And I was like, well, you know what, if I hate it in 2 years, it's fine. And I can still go back and get a PhD. But if I don't do that, that option will have expired. Right. So give it 2 years. See if I like it. And if I like it, then I can take a look at two different roads versus like really committing to a road so early after graduating and being relatively young. So that's what got me into finance. I ended up loving it. I actually went to the buy side, not the sell side immediately. I worked at a place called Fisher Francis Trees and Watts, which was a really interesting firm focused on central bank reserve management. I know that sounds really boring, but it actually was kind of exciting to work with this is before the euro, right? So you had the Austrian National Bank. You had the Danish National Bank. We worked with the Bundesbank of Germany. So that just felt kind of like really amazing to kind of work with these huge, large institutions in terms of their currency reserves. Anyway, cut to about 5 years. I kind of went up through the ranks there and ended up kind of managing our client group, working for one of the partners. And then I thought I should go to a bigger firm. That firm was about 200 people. Ended up going to BlackRock. Worked with Barbara Novick at BlackRock in the U.S. institutional group. Really liked it. They were only $400 billion at the time, just to show you how old I am. But it was really big. And I think one of the things I learned from BlackRock, which is a fantastic institution, but is that they have a specific style for managing assets that is really about scale. And wasn't necessarily about a bespoke or more boutique investment approach tailored to different clients, which when you're in the role that I was in, is where your product knowledge and your technical expertise gets to get married with the client dialogue. And so that's what made me realize, I kind of want to go to smaller places. And at that point, hedge funds, so this is in kind of the mid 2000s, were really starting to create quite a buzz. And I got attracted to a place called Drake and worked there for several years. And that's where I had my big success. And that's probably where I had my light bulb moment, which is because I'd been at bigger firms with very established client bases. And then I went to a very entrepreneurial place that was a fraction of the size. There was this moment where I was like, I realized that if I don't raise the money, it isn't here. There's no one else, right? There's no safety net of some business card or some business. Like, it's on me to go out and make it happen. And that was terrifying, but I think that was the impetus. And that's where I had my greatest jump and my biggest success. And that's what launched me then into the more of the blue chip kind of hedge fund alternative fields. And I left them right before the financial crisis, and ended up kind of making my way while pregnant, I might add, into Canyon Partners, which is where I am now. So I joined Canyon in 2009, and I've been there ever since. And this has been the perfect place. Really interesting people, fantastic caliber of investment process and investment expertise, but small, and able to have really interesting conversations with clients and actually create something for them. And what we actually invest in has a lot of stories, right? It's not a macro where you're kind of just taking a look at FX rates or where the interest rate curve is, where the forward curve is, and where something's trading. This is about going into highly complex or distressed assets and untangling the liabilities and the assets and the management team and the triangulation to kind of how that's being priced in the market and figuring out if there's value there. And it's usually a story on why we think that the value is at a place that the market thinks it's not. And so there's a little bit of a trust me exercise that we have it right, but at this point we've been around for 35 years. And so it's been a great place to land. Anyway, that's it.
Well, what I find fascinating about like this entire through line of your career and journey is, two things stand out. One, for people listening to this are going to, be, it's sort of, it's fascinating to think an English major kind of found their way into a very technical industry, if you will, like finance, and that to, not only thriving, but really building an extraordinary career at all of the best firms there. So it shows that, when you find something that you're passionate about or something that fits right, it doesn't matter where you began and you created that opportunity for yourself. But the other part that is also interesting in all of the choices you made is you kept aligning it with what was right for you. So if you felt like a smaller, more entrepreneurial firm was a better match, like you didn't hesitate, you didn't follow a narrative, you chose what was right for you.
Yeah, I think for me, it's, I think the entrepreneurial bent, because that success that I'd had at Drake was so inspiring to have that kind of impact and to really directly correlate my efforts to EBITDA, right? And say that that was what I've done and that's how I've moved the firm forward. That's a much harder thing to get done at a large institution. And it's not because there's anything bad about that, but I think for me personally, I like that level of visibility and ownership and accountability. And it's hard. There's I think there's a benchmark. I get benchmarked probably almost daily in terms of winning, losing, competing. Because in sales, which is I'm the head of business development, if you're raising money or if you're losing money or if your story's resonating, if your story's not resonating. And so that keeps you very accountable, but highly focused on kind of, what the objectives is for the firm.
Now, I'm curious about, if you go back to the early days of your career and here you were starting in a whole new industry and all of that, how did you kind of find your voice or confidence? I mean, what were the specific things that, if you're not coming from, with an MBA in finance or something like that, and you're entering this new field, what was that like for you to kind of figure out what are the building blocks that helped you find your own voice?
So that's an interesting item. So I would say I was slower to understand where I fit because I hadn't really planned for it in my career. right? So I kind of was like, oh, this is a lark. Let's see what it's like. And I kind of liked the people. And there was, again, the really big thing was I'm working with such smart, motivated people. And they're incredibly intelligent, thoughtful, lovely people in this industry. That's not what they're known for, but there are a lot of them in this area. And I have a lot of friends that I've, had and developed and nurtured over the last 20 years or so in the industry. So that's one. I think just working with smart people and the meritocracy of the industry. And I know I'm not getting to kind of like what it was where I found my voice, but that's one of the things that I really felt versus some other industries where potentially there can be more political elements in the track. That in America, it's very much, and again, going back to my first statement, what have you produced? And can you show how you produced it in a way that was, accretive to your institution? Yes, you should move forward. And it was, as black and white as those things get. And hard work, I felt correlated to that output. And so I was like, well, I know I can work hard and I know I can learn it. But I probably was slower to ramp than some of my peers who knew they wanted to do this right there, right then. And the other thing that, again, when we were kind of going through some of the discussions earlier in our conversation, one of the things is finding your moment to be authentic and to show who you are is really important. I also think, can I be who I am at this institution? Yeah. And I remember this kind of ridiculous story, but I was at BlackRock at the time, and I was, I think, the only woman that would go into this huge kind of investment process. It's basically their investment committee or research project. And I was there effectively to take notes and to inform the sales staff about what had been discussed. And if there was a shift in strategy or outlook, that we would then relate to the global sales staff so that we were consistent in our views and what we were communicating. Anyways, we were in a brand new building. I walked in before everybody, because I would get there before everybody, because I didn't want to walk in with all these men. I was pretty young. I was a little intimidated. And I walked in, I was holding a coffee from Starbucks that I had gotten that morning, and the door swung back, popped the coffee top off, and then out of my hand, and I spilled coffee all over the brand new rug of the big room, right? That everyone came in, that we had whenever our most important clients came in. This is where Larry Fink would sit. This was a big deal. Anyway, I won't name names, but as people were coming in, and these are the partners and the most senior staff, they're like, this is no good. Our CEO is going to have a really big problem with this. And he did. And he got really mad, and he thought someone at one of the senior guys had done it. And he was upset that they were showing so little disregard to our new furnishings, and kind of wouldn't let it go. Got pretty focused that this wasn't okay. And everyone was looking around who did it? Who did it? And finally I was like, I can't. And I was like, Larry, I did it. I'm really sorry. It popped out of my hand and there's nothing I can do. And the deputy CIO, my name is Scott, said, well, that was brave. That was really stupid, but that was very brave. But I will say, after that, my equity with everybody for having done that went up. Yeah. And I had a whole different set of relationships out of it. And I was viewed so much more as I'm not a peer, but as someone that they would maybe want to invest in. And it was a moment of total terror. Yeah. But it was also I can't let someone else take the blame, and this is not who it can be. So anyways, it's a long-winded story, but it was one of those moments that I always think back to as another jump for me, where I was like, it's okay to be a little disruptive and be true to yourself in a way that maybe might not be positive, but then you can kind of breathe and people see who you are, and that actually accelerates where you go.
Right. And it's such a powerful example of taking, a situation like coffee spilling, but it became an example of your character, showing in terms of taking full accountability. If you do it then in the scariest of moments in front of the executives of this firm, it shows what you're made of, but it also, their reaction to it would have also told you what they're made of. And if there wasn't a fit, it's also a good indication of where you belong. And I think it illustrates perfectly how every single opportunity can actually be an accelerant in some ways, if you show up fully.
Right.
What if you could pinpoint the invisible ceilings limiting your success? Imagine having clarity on your strengths and barriers so you can take action and gain unstoppable momentum to advance as a future-ready leader. Well, that's exactly what the Beyond Barriers quiz will help you discover. You'll get your personalized score based on the 25 essential elements proven to accelerate success in the digital age, so you can understand what's holding you back and where to focus your efforts. The Beyond Barriers quiz is completely free and takes just a few minutes. Go to iambeyondbarriers.com/quiz and take the quiz today.
So as you're sharing the story, you also highlighted how few women are in the industry. It's notoriously, male dominated. And, for leaders like yourself that have made it to the top, there's a lot of wisdom to share for someone who's either exploring this industry or at the early stages of building their career in this industry. What would you say to a young woman who's at the start of her career, one, about why it's worth considering this industry, and second, what is the one thing to keep in mind?
So I will answer that, but before I answer it, I want to preface that I will give this advice with as much humility as I can, because I think that I still make mistakes every day on this, and I also think where women are now and where the industry now is different. I think, and I don't think the industry has caught up as fast as where the women are in their expectations, and that's the fault of the industry. But I think we certainly are in a much different place than when I started my career, and I could cite all sorts of horrendous examples of unconscious bias, et cetera, that happen, and they still happen, and I don't think they happen necessarily out of a malice. It is, it's a little, and I hesitate to the word, but, again, how men grew up at 40, 50 years ago and where we're growing up today, and that consciousness, there's still a space, there's still a gap between it. Yeah. And I think, but I do think that you have to approach it with a conversation and empathy, even on the other side if it's a man or if it's someone in a position of power. It's a conversation, and most of the time, I think none of this comes from malice. I don't. I think it comes from habit. It comes from experience. It comes from what they saw in their families, which is talking about grandparents, right? And I find that if you can have a conversation with someone that is thoughtful, empathetic, understanding their context, because their experience is not your experience, and trying to create that shared experience. So they're like, oh, I get it. They have so much more time for you, and they respect the way you're going to approach it. And that's a problem solving discussion. And it shows them that you're solving a problem and not creating one necessarily that can be easily avoided, right? One of the big things about being successful here is picking your spots, right? And is finding the time that you really do need to make a stand. And again, the more that you can work with the people, as long as you trust them, you respect them, and you feel that is deserved, the better you'll do. And I will say, I think when I think back to some of my personal failures, most of them came from my own insecurity and my lack of trust to people. And if I can revisit those situations and take a breath, it's not that I was always playing with the best actors, like in my entire 25-year career, but I'm better than bringing it down to that level, right? Like you can move on. And you don't need to win the little fights, right?
Yeah.
It's all show, don't tell. Just keep on doing your job, keep on doing really well. And there's nothing that can, it's a merit. Hopefully you're in a career and you're in a corporate environment that is meritocratic. And if you can trust that, then you just need to kind of put your head down and keep on moving forward.
And that's certainly true for this industry, right? Like it's very much about, the results. It's extremely result driven. So you're not mired in the politics. Ultimately, if you have the results to show for it, the success will come in that.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting. There was a someone I worked with once said that your bad behavior, the tolerance for your behavior is directly correlated to your revenue impact, right? So the more like the higher the revenue, the more higher the tolerance there is for bad behavior. I actually think that has come down a lot. I think there is a place where that shift, and I'm not talking about like criminal behavior or exploitive behavior or anything like that, but I'm just talking about, tantrums, right? Or, imperious behavior within the workplace and not treating people the way you would want to be treated. That, I feel like a lot of that has gotten so much more muted over the last 10 years since I've worked here. I mean, not at Canyon, I'm just in the industry in general. I just see it with my peers and I hear from it from other people. It's not that it doesn't exist, but it's much better than where it was.
Yeah, and that's why it's actually a terrific opportunity for women that are interested in this industry to like build their careers, because it really is at the intersection of big picture thinking and power and capital, and really making shifts in the world, through the work that is being done at the firm. So a lot of the work is about risk taking and big decision making. The nature of the work in this industry is a lot of, placing thoughtful bets, if you will, and risk management and risk taking is so much a part of what the field is about. Yet oftentimes, when it comes to your own career, women in particular tend to struggle with decision making or taking the risks that will propel them forward. How have you navigated through that, and what have you learned in terms of actionable advice for someone who's stuck and unable to decide between which path to take?
It's almost something that can come from like therapy. But what I would say is you can't look at what you need to do as your end product. And every large effort, every large initiative is literally a series of just hundreds of tasks, of small tasks. And to the extent that it's an overwhelming feeling and you don't want to take that risk, the best way I know how is to deconstruct this project or this risk into what are the tasks that would be needed to affect this. And what you find is that a lot of them are, you write them down. It's a micro approach. You write down what are the tasks that I need to do to, let's say, I'll give an example from like, I need to hire 5 new sales teams. What do I need to do that? And that feels like a lot, especially in an incredibly intense talent pool regime that we've had over the last, say, 9 to 12 months. And it's something as simple as like, well, I need to call 5 people that I trust to get their views on the placement agents that I might be using. And so now and then I need to call those placement agents and set up meetings. And I need to, and it once you start breaking down exactly what it is, you can create all these small wins, right? And you can create these little check boxes. And then every day I can be like, okay, I did this to get us closer. I did this to get us closer. And what you realize is you've then built up, I think you've accomplished 2 things. I think you've built up more confidence about taking it on, because you can see it through a very narrow lens, and you'll have achieved something. You'll know, no matter what, you have done 100%, you've done 20%. And so you've built up the equity in the project that you're trying to achieve. And number 2, you've created this series of wins that you've done, that you're accountable for, that you own. And that will naturally give you this positive feedback loop of if I can do this, I can do the next 5. And then I can do the next 5. And maybe I can do 10 and I can make them bigger. But I think there's always this, I'm a big thinker. This person's a big thinker. They make these large decisions. None of these large decisions are made without making a bunch of little, just accomplishing a bunch of little tasks, right? And make those decisions and move it forward, and don't think about what this means one way or the other. And I think that's something we try to do here at Canyon is we try to create the ability, or we're trying to get better at not being worried about failure, but about supporting risk taking that's positive. You're just not going to have 100% success rate in your job. It's impossible. It's impossible personally. It's impossible professionally. So what's the resilience? What's going to keep you coming back to keep on taking risks is also I think another item that's really important.
Right. So make a big problem smaller and then start taking action. So you start to see the momentum, and that, which is better than being stuck in one place, overwhelmed and with inertia. Right. So you keep moving forward and you'll find the path forward in that. And that also helps to build your confidence as you go along.
Exactly.
So, and then, like you said, not all things work out as you hope, despite your best intentions. How have you dealt with failure? And how do you ensure that you're learning from that experience, and what has worked for you that someone else could apply?
Yeah, I think, I would say I have a failure almost every day. It's usually I haven't done it's not my personal life, or blah blah blah. There's something I'm like, oh, I forgot to do that, to get that done. So, it's big and small. I think there's three types of failures, right? Or in terms of not meeting a goal or not doing what you said you do. And one is like, is it something that was that failure a result of a misguided effort? So did you get the problem wrong, right? And then number 2, was it a result of lack of effort, right? Did it just not work hard enough? Or was it kind of a deus ex machina? Was it an exogenous event that there was nothing you could do about? And then depending on what lane it fits in, then you deconstruct the problem. If it's an exogenous event, brush it off, keep on going, because those will continue to happen, right? We didn't raise a lot of money in 2020. COVID hit. Not going to blame myself, right? You're going to keep on moving, right? The lack of effort is probably the one that's the most painful, I think, because you're like, if I had only done this, or maybe I thought it would be easier, so I didn't need to do that. And that's a tough one, but it's one you have to take on with honesty and say, okay, you know what? I've been slacking off. I got to reapply myself. And what do I need to do? And why did I slack off on that? Right? Yeah. And then the final one, was it a misguided effort? And that is where taking a look at it, and you can take real lessons. Okay, what did I misread about that situation? And that's one that actually will build up and create experience that will make you a more valuable part of your industry or of your firm, because you're going to be able to know, remember when that happened, this is what I want to do here. And you're going to, and that's what starts creating your portfolio of successes, is being able to read back to prior failures.
Oh, this is a fantastic framework. I never heard it described this way, but it shows you that in every situation, there's something to learn and something to grow from, even including if it is an external event that you have no control of, but it still teaches you resiliency to deal with things you have zero control over and still keep moving forward with enthusiasm. So that's a powerful way to look at how failure can give you feedback on exactly where to improve.
Right.
Let's talk about how you stay grounded. I mean, you're in an environment where this constant stimulus, right? Lots of big things happening, lots that you're responsible for. What has helped you, balance your personal, life and your family and all of that?
So I have 3 children. I'm married. I have 3 children. I've come from a big family, big German family. So I think and everyone would say this, and I don't want to be too trite about it, but I do think ultimately your children are the most grounding thing that can possibly happen to you. And I have three at various ages, and if there's anything that's going to ground you and take the air out of your balloon, it's a teenage girl. So that's very helpful. You want a really harsh mirror on what you're doing right or wrong, she'll give it to you. But yeah, look, and I think it's funny. Again, I'm speaking my age here, but children can give you a great lesson because this is something we say with my good friends, which is fail early, fail small, right? Fail late, fail big. And so it's this idea, like how much rope how much do you let your child fail? And if you're kind of like alpha and you're kind of like performance oriented, and when your kid is like 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, you're there to make sure they do everything right. And in some respects, and this is something I've learned as my children have gotten older, the impact and the consequences of failure are longer lasting and more frightening, right? And that has been a big lesson on how to spend my time. It's been a lesson on when to invest, when to pull back, when to re-engage, how to get comfortable with failure, with their failure not being like, they're not going to be perfect. Like, and again, as they get to a certain age, your lack of control, right? And that is something that is really difficult. I think for high performance people that are in a job or have a certain amount of, authority at a firm, is that they feel like they have a lot of control, and your family teaches you that you really have none, right? Ultimately, and I think that is, again, I go back to this feedback loop. That is a very healthy thing, and I think it actually, the family has helped me become a little less stressed about this because it gives you that perspective. Like ultimately, do you think you're going to have a completely controllable existence? Absolutely not. And so how do you keep with the control, and when do you try to go in and fix something, and when do you let it happen on its own? And, so I think that's been a huge learning curve for me for like the last 2 to 3 years, especially with COVID and what that, all that impact with the children. That to me probably has had the most profound impact on my understanding and my ability to engage with people here and keep myself grounded on what my role is kind of in both places, right? As a woman, who's trying to balance both sides of her life.
Right. But it also shows that, you can have a career and a family and, find perspective in both, and how they really, empower and support both sides with the right perspective.
Yeah, that's the most important aspect. I mean, I'm glad you brought it up, Nikki, which is like the most important thing is if you don't have a healthy home life, it is unlikely that you will have a sustainable and healthy career. And it doesn't mean marriage, doesn't mean this, but you need to have a counterbalance to your professional experience, because they feed each other. You won't get the lessons you need just in the office. You need to get the lessons in your personal life.
Yeah. And you realize that we're all interconnected. It takes a village to make, just as it takes a team in the workplace, it takes a community at home as well.
Right.
And when they're interconnected, they're more fulfilling. It's not just about achievement, but it leads to more fulfilling existence. Speaking of community, you are pro at business development, and so much of that is about relationship building. If there's one thing that you found key to sort of building powerful professional relationships that have helped you achieve business goals, career goals, what would that be? Is there a habit? Is there a daily action, or just a mindset?
I think everything in a business of relationships is incremental. I don't think there can be some grand sweeping. So there's an item we've been doing some leadership training, and one of the biggest mantras I've taken two things that I've really taken from that though is make small promises and keep them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's about, if you say you're going to do it, just do that little thing. It's the little things that can really resonate. And as you build that internally and externally, that helps those relationships, I think, the most, right?
Yeah.
Being a consistent source of support, being authentic, right? No one wants to feel like, in the sales world, they want to be able to talk to a person that they feel like they can trust. So, I mean, you've got to do your work. You've got to know your product. You've got to have conviction. But you have to be authentic to the person on the other side of the desk at all points, because that is what allows to have a personal investment, them to have a personal investment in you. And even if the business doesn't get done, they will circle back to you at a different point in time because they feel like there's something there that exists outside of the transaction. And that's what's the most important thing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the themes that are coming through loud and clear through everything you've shared is authenticity and accountability.
Yes.
It's like be authentic and take total accountability for the results that you want. When you take ownership, then you can create, the right outcomes that you're seeking. Yeah.
Exactly. I think also a very good friend of mine that I worked with for years and years, fantastic guy in the space, once told me, like, my second favorite answer is no. And he's like, because I can move on, right? If it's yes, fabulous. We're going to work together. But it's okay to say no and for us to continue to have a relationship that's outside this transaction. But let me spend my time in the right place, right?
Yeah.
Let me use this in a way. The worst answer is maybe, because you're kind of like, am I doing this? Are we doing this? What are we doing? Right?
Yeah.
So he was a phenomenal guy. And I always remember that phrase.
That's great advice for anyone there. All right. So let's do the lightning round questions. Sure. I'm going to ask you 5 questions and look for your responses that will help our audience get to know you even better. So the first one, what book has greatly influenced you?
So I'm going to not give you one quick answer. Well, I'm going to give you a quick answer because it's lightning. First of all, I believe in heroes, so I like fiction. So I actually am not a self-help book. I'm not a business book person. I think you want to find a book that inspires. So, and that inspiration and that ability to take you out of some quotidian, tasks and to reset where we are in the world is the best thing that you can do for yourself when you come back in to the workplace. So one of my favorite authors is Martin Amis. The one that his most recent book is called Inside Story. It's phenomenal. His later series have really been very much focused on mortality. He's one of the most literate, kind of educated writers out there. He's just one of my favorites. He's incredibly funny and dark, but also very moving. So that's my book. And that's what I would say, go fiction.
Yep. What is your favorite inspiring quote?
That's easy. So this is the one that's always changing, which is there's more harm done in indecision than the wrong decision. It's just
love that.
Move forward and you can always correct a mistake, but it's better to keep moving.
That's great advice. What is one word or a moniker that you would use to describe yourself?
So the word that I like to go with authentic. I like to go with what you see is what you get, and that, hopefully there's no hidden pools of agenda when we're in a room.
Yeah. I can attest to that. So, what is a one change or habit or behavior that you implemented that made your life better?
I think it's setting aside time to handle the business of being a family and not subjugating it, but saying, okay, I got to take an hour a day to make sure that we, have we done with this with the kids' schools? Do we have these activities? Do we plan this vacation? And just being like, I've got to take that hour every day. So at least it's a dedicated, focused sense of my time, even when I'm in the office.
Right. What power song would you want playing as you walk out on stage?
So I thought about this. I'm a hairband. So I like hairband. I was thinking "Welcome to the Jungle" by GNR.
I love that. That is on brand, Ingrid. That's on brand.
Get the hair.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was absolutely delightful. And there was so much actionable advice and wisdom in everything you shared. And it really gives perspective into understanding how you made it to the top and how someone else who's dreaming of the same can do it as well. So thank you for being on our show. And thank you for inspiring women worldwide.
Well, thank you, Nikki. I can't tell you how honored, flattered, and surprised I am to have been invited onto this podcast. I really appreciate it. I think the work that Beyond Barriers is doing is phenomenal. We've had such success with it at Canyon. We're excited about, our next kind of docket of new leaders that we're trying to develop here with your help and support. And I think our partnership has been one of the best things that we've done at this firm. So thank you again for the time today.
Likewise, Ingrid. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Beyond Barriers podcast. There are thousands of podcasts out there, and we are so grateful that you've chosen to listen to ours. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating and tell a friend about it. And subscribe to get new episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Visit IamBeyondBarriers.com, where you'll find show notes, links, and the best way to connect with our guests. See you next episode.